I'm sure you know all the stories yourself. I mean about bad apartments and cursed houses. I've read a lot of them myself. They say that any bad apartment is followed by a trail of sinister and inexplicable events that necessarily precede the story and sometimes even cause it. If this is the case, then apartment number 56 in building 278 Lenin Street was somehow an exception to the rule. At one time, when I decided to play detective and started asking around, googling, leafing through old newspapers in the library, I could not find anything interesting about it. It was built in such and such a year, put into operation on such and such date. There were no hangings, no veins slit, no disappearances, no madness, no psychopaths, sectarians, or other sinister personalities lived there. There were no grandmothers whispering about the apartment in the corner of the courtyard. It didn't even have some sort of pronounced notoriety. There were always quite ordinary people living in the apartment, and they lived there for a long time, and if they left, it was also for quite ordinary reasons. In short, if the apartment had its own dark secret, the root cause of the events I will describe below, I never managed to get to it. Nevertheless, I was always convinced that there was something wrong with the apartment. There was something wrong about it. Something dark lurking in the semi-darkness of the dusty rooms. It was all the more strange to me that no one seemed to notice it. Of course, then years later when I grew up, went to school, left our trashy neighborhood for another, however almost the same, I began to doubt the veracity of my own investigation. Like any child, I could make something up. A few coincidences gave a boost to my childish imagination, and so another urban legend was born in my head. At least, that's what I've been thinking lately. But just yesterday, going through my junk and digging up my old diary, I sat down to reread it, and my skepticism was thoroughly shaken. I hesitated for a long time before telling this story to you. After all, I make absolutely no claim to anything, and frankly speaking, I didn't understand almost anything. I myself, as it is not difficult to guess, lived next door to apartment number 56. However, my interest was caused not even by the proximity of living, but by a very specific case from my early childhood. I was then about 5 or 6 years old. I had not yet gone to school, and my mother took me everywhere with her. That's how I got to the apartment where my mom's friend lived at that time. The women quickly closed to chirp in the kitchen, and I was sent to one of the rooms where I was left to myself. Interestingly, all the subsequent events have been completely erased from my memory, but I still remember all the preceding events with amazing accuracy. I remember the tart, naphthalene odor of the room where the Soviet carpet was spread on the floor. I remember the cracked mirror above the sideboard and the monumental Soviet cabinets. Black and white photographs in frames. I remember my simple toys, chewed rubber dinosaurs that I used to play with on the floor. I quickly got bored with the games, and with childlike curiosity, I began to explore the room. I remember climbing up on the sideboard and opening cupboard doors one by one. The next memory is of my mother's pale face leaning over me in horror. They say I screamed and thrashed in some sort of fit for almost an hour before they could calm me down. My father came running. The ambulance came. They took me away, and then I don't remember much else. My mother told me later that they heard a scream from the room so frantic that at first she didn't even realize it was me. I was thrashing around on the floor and calmed down only after the doctor arrived and injected me with something. It was a terrible scandal. My parents were almost deprived of their parental rights. But in the end, they didn't find a scratch on me. I was unharmed, and the case was hushed up. What can't be said about my psychological state? After that incident, I didn't speak for almost a year. Of course, I never remembered what had happened or what I had seen. By the way, thanks to this case, I started school a year later and ended up repeating the first grade twice. In other words, the apartment impacted my entire future and not for the better. But that's another story. It took me a couple of years to come to my senses, after which the apartment occupied all my thoughts. I started keeping a sort of diary in which I wrote down my observations, theories, and events somehow related to it. Much of it is my speculation, some is possible coincidences and minor events that hardly deserve to be stated. I honestly don't know how interesting it would be to an outside reader at all, because I'm not recounting something obviously horrifying, which is what you'd normally expect from such stories. I mean, it wasn't like there was a monster jumping around the apartment, or ghosts howling in the closet at night, or someone moved in and was found dead. No, things happened in some other way. So I'll just recount a few stories from my diary that I witnessed myself and remember best, without any attempt to explain or relate them to each other. The first case was when my mom's friend still lived in the apartment. She lived alone, without relatives and without children. She did not complain about any paranormal things, but this is what happened to me. One evening I was going somewhere on my business, went to the stairwell and noticed that the door of the apartment is open wide. From the hallway was pouring warm lamplight. I didn't pay much attention to it and was about to go downstairs when I heard some mumbling. I listened and immediately recognized a man in the shadows slowly ascending the stairs. I froze in place. It was hard to explain, but the closer he came, the more I was seized by some inexplicable, indescribable horror. It was a hunched, tall old man, very tall. It was hard to see in the semi-darkness, but it seemed to me that his hump, bulging beneath his clothes, almost touched the ceiling. At least he was a head taller than any adult I was used to. His elongated, completely bald and gnarly head swayed as he stepped heavily and very slowly down the steps, leaning against the railing. There was nothing overtly horrible about his appearance, but there was something unnatural, something wrong in his figure, in his movements. It was as if a mannequin had come to life, or something was trying to imitate human behavior, movement, and speech, but it was doing a poor job. And the realization was truly frightening. The old man kept muttering the same song to himself, mouthing the words.
Робин Бобин Барабек скушал 40 человек и корову и быка и кривого мясника.
I stared at him like a dummy, unable to move. The very sight of him, his appearance here in this entryway, that humorous children's song he was humming, the incongruity of the normal state of affairs was monstrous. I wanted to scream, to skulk into my apartment, slamming the door shut, but I couldn't. In the meantime, the old man crossed the stairwell and entered the apartment without even looking at me. The door slammed shut and the light in the hallway went out. I stood like a statue for about 10 minutes. I even had the courage to knock timidly on the door, but no one opened it. And, of course, no elderly relatives had come to visit my mother's friend that day. The next incident happened much later when an elderly and very intelligent couple moved into the apartment. I was a schoolboy of about 14 and one day, coming home, found a frightened neighbor in a bathrobe and slippers on the porch. She was crying and babbling something incoherent, of which I could not make out anything, but I immediately realized that it was about the apartment. Then I was a little confused, but I tried to calm her down and even volunteered to escort her, thus showing that there could be nothing terrible in the apartment. Well, so I hoped. We went up to the floor, entered the hallway. The door was unlocked. The sun was shining outside the windows. It was daytime, and the apartment looked normal. There was nothing sinister in it, except that the woman was genuinely frightened and her panic was slowly starting to transfer to me as well.
Over there, son.
We walked into the hall and she pointed to a small wooden door. It led to another room. It wasn't even a room, but rather a windowless 3 by 5 meter space that was very dusty. There were children's balls on the floor, some trash, and a table. On it was a candlestick, very beautiful but dirty. There were dishes, by the look of them even antique. There was a light bulb hanging from a wire on the ceiling. There was nothing else in the room. My heart was relieved. I calmed down and tried to explain to my roommate that there was no one in the room and she must have imagined something, but she just cried. It wasn't that, but the room itself. The woman swore and swore to me that no door and this room in her apartment was never there. She discovered it only in the morning, barely looked inside and ran out into the street. And I could well understand her. On the table, covered with a centimeter layer of dust, one could clearly see someone's numerous palm prints, large and small, and clearly not belonging to an elderly woman. That same evening I heard the roar of a perforator and the sounds of furniture being moved. The pensioners never appeared in the apartment again. I heard that they started renting it out. I don't know why they didn't just get rid of it. I know it from my own words and am not sure of its authenticity. At one time the apartment was rented by a lonely man in his 40s, Konstantin Mikhalic. He was a good man, but he was addicted to drinking. So he lived and lived, then he moved out. A few years later we met him in a common company, had a drink and talked. Taking into account my pathological interest in the unfortunate living space, I could not help asking him, saying that I had heard that the apartment was not good. And how was it? Konstantin Mikhalic was silent for a minute, then laughed and said,
Well, yes! After it I almost stopped drinking. You're laughing in vain. I drank myself to hell, to white fever.
And he told this story. So I went on a bender, he said. For a week I drank uncontrollably, running from home to the stall, you know, as it happens. And one of these days I woke up to someone stroking my head. I open my eyes and I see a huge bug sitting on the bed next to me, stroking my head and saying, "Forgive me. Forgive me. What are you staring at?" That's what happened. I was freaked out, but not too much. I was drunk. Ridiculous. But it wasn't so much the bug that scared me as the way it got into the apartment. I thought, why didn't I close the door? I ran out into the hallway, looked. No, everything was closed. I come back to the bedroom. The beetle sitting on the bed, huge, as big as a man black, chewing with its jaws, looking at me. I was really freaking out. I'm drunk, I think. I must go to the stall immediately, get cured, and the obsession will pass. So I did. I came back, got hungover, but the beetle hadn't disappeared. He, how should I say it, suddenly got out into the bag he'd brought, took out something, drank it. Anyway, as fucked up as it sounds, we started drinking together with Beetle. We took turns getting refills, then I'd go to the stall, then he'd disappear somewhere and then reappear. And we started talking, dumb as it sounds, but about the most ordinary things like politics and women. I don't know how long I sat like that. It seemed like a couple days to me. I must have been completely out of my mind at that point. I couldn't stop drinking, I couldn't sleep. And the strange thing was that no matter how much we drank, I didn't seem to get drunk. I was drunk, of course, but I couldn't get wasted. But I couldn't stop either. I realized that all this was some kind of nonsense, but I couldn't stop. The accident saved him. He went to get another dose and couldn't keep on his feet, fell down and couldn't get up. Someone called an ambulance, and I woke up in the hospital. Well, sobered up and bruised, I went back to the apartment to get my things. They evicted me, and for a good reason. I didn't see the beetle. And there never was one. Vodka is a terrible thing, bro. Konstantin Mikhalic laughed and told it all as a half joke. As you can see, the whole paranormal thing going on in the apartment was creepy, but kind of harmless. No one ended up missing, dead or maimed. For the most part, that was the case, but not always. And here's another case in point. It was during the period when the apartment was being rented out, when the next tenants organized a hangout in the apartment. Music was blaring, mats were being used, and smoke was billowing in the entryway. The neighbors who tried to stop all this outrage were told to get lost, and the police were in no hurry to arrive, as it turned out in vain. At some point, the tired tenants resigned themselves to it and just waited for everything to end by itself, but it ended in an unexpected way. Somewhere deep in the night, a heartbreaking female scream came from the apartment. With a bad feeling, I went out to the platform. There were already crowded, frightened teenagers, puzzled cops, and neighbors whispering to each other. I was invited to be a witness, and then I saw everything for myself. We went into the room where some creature was huddled in a corner, trembling with all its body. I shuddered, and it was only after a closer look that I realized it was a human being, a girl. Very pale, naked, and covered in some kind of slime. I don't know what happened, but she had no hair on her head, no eyebrows, no eyelashes, no ears, no fingers or toes, none. There was no blood either. The wounds in those places were frostbitten, pale pink flesh framing the neatly cut pieces of bone. She didn't react to anything, staring blankly at her own stumps, only sobbed softly, floundering in a clear, slimy puddle. The sight made me sick. The cops quickly came to their senses and began to twist the participants of the failed party. They did not dare to approach the girl. I don't know what happened to her afterwards, and whether she was able to say anything. During the whole hour of paperwork and other formalities, she did not utter a single coherent phrase, and they carried her out of the apartment on a stretcher. She just moved and twitched her stumps in the air. It's a horrible sight. Something monstrous had happened to her. The apartment punished her. That's what I think. Of course, I'd love to know the details of the story, but the authorities have taken over the case, and who's going to report to an 18-year-old student? Remarkably, a similar story happened to another man. He sort of woke up one day missing a couple fingers on his hand. Again, there was no blood, as if it had been cut off with a laser. Couldn't tell what it was. I yelled, of course, and the doctors came. But the story didn't end in anything terrible. The man didn't seem to understand anything at all. He lived in the apartment for a long time, and strangely enough, nothing else happened to him. As you can see, these are all separate stories, unrelated to each other, and no matter how hard I tried, I could not fit these and many other strange cases into a system. They just happened to different people at different times, and each time in a different way. However, there were some regularities in the behavior of the apartment. I even highlighted and listed them in my diary. For example, any mechanical clock refused to work in the apartment. It stopped immediately. This was despite the fact that this wouldn't happen with electronic clocks, like the ones on computers and phones. The apartment also, how shall I put it, occasionally liked to lock up. It happened quite often. The owner would go somewhere, then come back, put the key in the keyhole, but the door would not open. A locksmith from the nearest housing and utilities department usually could not help. The door seemed to grow into the wall, and the lock was jammed. It could last for several hours. Then, after another attempt, the lock would turn as if nothing had happened and the door would open. I remember that it always confused the new tenants, and the local locksmiths even got used to it, sometimes refusing to come at all. They said it would go away. The situation with animals was also strange. There were never any pets in the apartment. They didn't take root. Once in it, the pets began to behave restlessly. Cats ran away. Dogs attacked everyone. As a result, the owners had to get rid of them one way or another. Birds were another matter. Crows, pigeons, sparrows. They used to hang in clouds in front of the windows, hitting the glass. Sometimes also suddenly disappearing, but somehow they showed some pathological interest in the apartment. I myself have caught many times the feathery birds scurrying around the room, which had made their way through the window. Why is that? I don't know, And of course, the piano. Early, very early in the mornings, and usually in the spring, the melancholy music of the piano would come from the apartment. It's even one of my earliest memories. As a child, barely awake in the semi-darkness, when the whole house was still asleep, I could hear this pitiful melody through the wall. It didn't seem strange to me then. Almost all the neighbors heard it, many of them, but no one could identify the source. No one in our house or in our neighborhood had ever played the piano. Speaking of pianos, one more story, perhaps the last one. That day I woke up to this oppressive melody and couldn't go back to sleep. By then I knew it had no source, that it was oozing right out of the walls. It was unsettling and eerie. I got out of bed, drank coffee, tried to occupy myself with something, but couldn't focus on anything. I don't know why, but I looked out on the landing, and to my horror I saw that the door of the apartment was open. At that moment, the right thing to do was to go back to my room, cover my head with a blanket, plug my ears, and pretend that nothing was going on, because an open apartment door at 4 in the morning did not bode well. I don't know why I went there, but as dumb as it sounds, yes, I went there. In the best tradition of shit horror movies. My eyes were getting used to the darkness, and I could make out the outlines of objects. The music seemed louder in the hallway, and I thought it was coming from the kitchen. With a sinking heart, I crept in, and that's when the first weirdness began. The kitchen had a normal appearance, but it was like it was bigger, longer than it should have been. It seemed to me that the end of the room extended beyond the perimeter of the house, and I could barely see it. But the real shock came when I reached the opposite wall. There was a passageway on the side that was not supposed to be there. A passage to a flight of stairs. It's just a concrete staircase leading upstairs to the 4th floor, or I don't know where. Overpowering the steady urge to run away, I slowly and tentatively climbed it, entering a rather narrow corridor. It was no longer the apartment of Brezhnevs. High, even very high ceilings, a long corridor, which in our real world should have been somewhere outside, at the height of the 4th floor. There was a light at the end of the corridor. On tiptoe, pressed against the wall, I almost crawled along it, and it led me to a room. The source of the music was there. The lamp was burning there. There too, I could clearly see some movement. I could not immediately understand what it was. I didn't have the courage to go closer and look into the room itself, so I watched from the corridor, seeing only the corner of the room. The wall of the room was an extension of the corridor wall. It was along the wall that the piano stood. Only there was no one sitting at it. The keys were pressed smoothly and not without a certain gracefulness by a dozen long pale offshoots, holes that went somewhere deep into the room. They slid deftly from pedals to keys, playing the same tune I'd heard so many times before. At first I thought that it was some kind of mechanical construction controlled by someone out there, or that it worked by itself. But the closer I looked, the clearer I felt the hairs on my head stand up. No, there could be no mistake. They were fingers. I could clearly make out the long but quite human nails, the folds of skin. The fingers of a creature that was somewhere out there in the back of the room, I don't know how far away, playing the piano. At this point I decided I'd had enough. To hell with all of this. The realization that the passageway could close at any minute and I would be left alone with it made me terrified. I started to back away, and then the music stopped. My fingers froze, squeezing the last, long and disturbing note out of the instrument. At that moment, I realized everything. I realized it before someone's elongated, irregularly shaped face slowly emerged from behind the door jamb. I didn't look at it. I turned and darted away. Luckily, the passage was in place. I staggered around for a long time that day, unable to bring myself not just to go back, but even to get close to the house. It had seen me, and I didn't know what the consequences would be. I slept with the light on for a long time afterward, and I was afraid of every rustle, expecting that the apartment would want to get rid of an unwanted witness, but absolutely nothing happened. The music continued to play in the morning as if nothing had happened, and every time I heard the piano playing, I tried in vain to push away the image of creepy fingers clacking on the keys. Why am I even telling you all this? And why did I suddenly start looking for and rereading my teenage diary? The thing is, just the other day I came across an ad for that very apartment, and I'm thinking about buying it. Take out a loan from the bank or sell the one I inherited, I don't care. I agree that it sounds silly given everything I've just told you. It's just that I look at my current life and realize that nothing significant or even just interesting will ever happen in it. All of the vivid and truly vivid memories have been related to the apartment in one way or another. I'm not trying to say that I'm some kind of special or I need more than everyone else. It's just that in all the time of my research, the only thing I've come to is that the apartment is a kind of an impossibility. A miracle. Yes, frightening and unpleasant, but still a miracle. And this is the miracle that everyone around me is trying hard to ignore, and I was just afraid of it, hiding behind my journal. After all, who says that miracles have to be cleaned up and comfortable? Maybe real miracles aren't for people at all. There's something else too. I said at the beginning that I didn't remember what I saw as a 5-year-old child. That's not exactly true. I don't really remember, but at night I have the same dream. It repeats in different variations, but the essence doesn't change. In the dream I enter the apartment where it is warm and cozy. The light is on in the rooms, and my long-dead mother and grandmother are sitting in the kitchen. They smile at me, and I smell the familiar smell of pies from my childhood. A kettle is boiling on the stove and a piano sounds somewhere above the ceiling, but it's no longer intimidating. Now, I feel like I'm home. I exchange a couple of ordinary, meaningless phrases with them and make my way to the very room where it all began. Just like when I was a kid, I stand on the sideboard and open the swinging doors of the cabinets. For a second I am blinded by a bottomless, staggeringly deep darkness, and in that darkness, one by one, the brightest balls of light, stars, thousands of stars begin to light up. I am drawn there, and they are coming at me at breakneck speed. Recoiling, I fall to the floor of the room and wake up. I don't know what it is, a real memory, some kind of sign, or even a trap. But this time I intend to make it to the end. This time I think I won't chicken out.